Chapter 2 begins, and we saw the deployment of the summer signings. The big questions I had were, how would this Milan play? How would they cope with no natural CDMs? How would Pioli deal with multiple campaigns, Serie A, Champions League, and eventually Coppa d'Italia? Well, in truth, we didn't have long to wait. The answers soon became pretty clear. The fan base was curious as to the formation. Really, with these players, 4-2-3-1 did not make much sense. So we started to see that in friendlies, strangely, Pulisic was being deployed on the right wing, not a position that any fan had predicted he would occupy. We thought that Chukwueze or maybe Romero would take that position, and throughout the season we had noticed that Pulisic had demonstrated a really high footballing IQ and that he could play that cam role that I think we would have liked to have seen him be integrated in that position so that we would end up with an attack of Leao on the left, Pulisic in the middle and Chukwueze on the right. Unfortunately, for most of the season, that did not transpire because Pioli always had other ideas. Right, so let's look at the actual fixtures. The first game was played on the 21st of August. A very strange game, which we won 2-0. We had little control and Bologna missed several good chances. However, a 2-0 win was good and nothing to be sniffed at. This was followed by 2 good wins where we played against some very passive teams, including a Mourinho-led Roma with a very well-known tactic, which is hang on until the 70th minute and then pile everything into the box. Unfortunately, a Milan derby loomed very large and we were on the back of 4 straight defeats in derbies. So we wondered if Pioli was going to change something. Surely he wouldn't go for a high line. Surely he would do everything possible to prevent Inter's pace from breaking us to pieces. Alas, the game was the footballing equivalent of Harikiri, where we were set up exactly as Inter wanted. The game, unfortunately, was also a sign of things to come, and a trend that never changed throughout the season. That trend being defeats against opponents who are proactive and attack the space in front of the back 4. This defeat was followed by several wins against more passive opponents, which, although unconvincing, Pioli was getting the points, and we thought that with such a new squad, this could be excused. Much of this changed at the end of October with 2 absolutely disastrous games against Juventus and Napoli. The latter after being 2 goals up, which always leaves a bad taste in the mouth. Overall, in the first 10 games, our new squad with Pioli in charge had delivered unconvincing football, but 7 wins, 2 losses and a draw, which I think the whole fan base agreed was not disastrous, putting into consideration the big number of changes. Now, let's look at formations, and this is a trend that started to repeat. Pioli was going to be deploying as many of the same players day in, day out, and I was 100% convinced, because of patterns in previous years, that he would injure players doing this. So, day in, day out. First 3 match days, exactly the same starting lineup. But this is only part of the story. Truth also is that he delayed making substitutions until very, very late in games. Again, pushing these players to the very limit. Against Inter, this was the lineup. It seems that, looking back on it, Tomori was suspended, but he still utilised Chao and Kier and deployed a high line, which was an absolutely insane tactic when these are 2 of our slower defenders. He left us exposed and allowed Inter to carve us open at will. At this point, it really seemed like Inter and Inzaghi had gotten into his mind, and he just didn't have a clue as to how to tackle that particular problem. Pioli, to me, demonstrated that he's not a manager capable of fighting in multiple campaigns. To me, he had completely failed to rotate and integrate squad players. And this tactic of constantly exposing and exhausting the same guys was about to pay dividends. Sixth match day, and Krunic finally got injured. There's only so many games that an individual player can play 90 minutes for. Yet Pioli decided that the thing to do was to deploy Adli in front of the back four. Now, during the season, we had an interview with Adli, and apparently all he had to do was tell Pioli a white lie that he had experience as a CDM, and Pioli said, "All right then," and put him there. Just mind-numbing. Game 7, one of our best early season performances. And what we noticed here is that Milan's lineup clearly performs well against static and slow opponents, and Lazio were exactly that during this game. Let's move on to Game 9, and I've got to say, this was nothing short of a disgusting match. Juventus had not played, any kind of creative football the entire season, and we, like the idiots that we are, maybe I should say the manager, fell into their trap. They had played match after match, playing very dull football, lulling opponents into a false sense of security, and then hitting them in a single moment to win 1-0. In fact, Allegri openly said, "Ugly football, 1-0 wins, I will take that." So, first of all, Ciao got a red card from pulling back Keane, who had spun past him. But then in the 62nd minute, Locatelli took a shot from a mile outside of the box, and sub that had come in, once again Krunic, the ball bounced off him and past Mirante. And if you look back at this game, Krunic was criminal. He was literally passing the ball straight to opponents. Whatever the injury was, he had not fully recovered and he was not ready. And this, the game against Napoli, match day 10, is really the proverbial game of two halves. First half, we took it to Napoli, looked in control. Giroud scored his 2 goals. Second half, however, Napoli realised that if they just attacked us, we had a very soft centre. It felt like opponents had quickly figured this Milan was not a team capable of defending leads and holding onto the ball. And this unease of this realization was something that was going to be palpable in the fan base for games to come. So let's now look briefly into the next 10 games in a section that I call Autumnal Disaster. So the next 10 games really demonstrated to all the fans that Milan would not be capable of putting in a Serie A title charge. They started with a home loss to Udinese, which by the way was Udinese's first match win of the season. This was followed by a draw against Lecce. However, what I want you to look at is all of the teams that we faced in this. There's only one actually really well put together and talented team here, and it's Atalanta. And of course, it's the game that we lost. This was the trend to be replicated throughout the season. Whenever we came up against a well-organized, well-coached team, we would lose the game. The next 10 games gave us 6 wins, 2 losses, 2 draws. So, what had we been able to surmise from the first 20 matches? Very few in-game tactical changes. Pioli was not picking on form, but he seemed to have his favourites. Some players said that they called him Papa. What? Is that a way to get you picked every single game? It seems to be. Also, you seem to say that, yeah, I'll play centre back and he'll put you there, or I'll play CDM and he'll put you there. Just crazy. Also, the team was over-relying on individual moments of brilliance with very little to no team play. And the most worrying sign of all, I guess, is the fact that we really had no shield in front of the back four. And there was no way that this team was going to be able to mount any kind of campaign and challenge anybody for anything with this setup. My main concern, however, is seen here. Pioli had started to rest players and change formations prior to Champions League fixtures. So the group stage, yes, we had a very difficult group. It was known as the group of death for this season. It contained Newcastle, PSG, Dortmund and us. However, Pioli's tactic to try and cope with this group and this campaign was to basically give up in Serie A matches, rest players as much as he could, and lose games in Serie A. So as you can see here, the Inter game was before the Newcastle match. We lost it. The Juventus game was before the PSG match. We lost it. The Udinese match was before the PSG home game. We lost it. The Atalanta match was before the Newcastle away match. We lost the Atalanta game. So, in the space of a couple of months, Pioli had managed to destroy our Champions League ambitions and any chance we had to go for a Serie A title or, obviously, to go for the next stage of the Champions League. For me, personally, October was the month to have pulled the trigger on the manager, because if I, as a simple fan, can spot that and can see that we were on a downward spiral, I do not understand how someone whose job is actually to make sure that Milan is successful doesn't do anything about it. It just doesn't make any sense unless your primary objective is nothing to do with victories, but only with financial sustainability. Because that means you keep the manager in place because he has a contract. To me, Pioli obviously was doing physical and economical damage to the club. And that economical damage alone actually hugely outweighed any wages due to him. And we pointed out in one of our podcasts that we had, by going out of the Champions League at such an early stage, we had actually missed out on the, the World Club Cup. And that was a guaranteed 45 million euros. So I would say that through sheer apathy, management had strangled us and derailed the season already by the winter. What I found strange as well, and I have to say it here, is that the Curva stayed completely quiet. The traditionalists, such as myself, were furious as they could see that things were not going to get any better. The tolerators, the group that I discussed in the previous chapter, indicated that we were now in a Europa League and that we could make progress in the Europa League, go very deep into it, and we still had potentially a chance in Serie A. And of course, we would be one of the favourites in the Coppa d'Italia. To me, all the markers as to how our season would go were already there. It was obvious to me that Pioli would be caught out by any team with a half-decent squad and manager. Yeah, Pioli to me really honestly believed like an absolute Interista. Now, if this wasn't enough, the entire saga had a background issue of the sports trainer and the medical team apparently hindering players. Now, we never got to the bottom of it. Was it Pioli's training methods? Was it Milan Lab? Was it the sports trainer? I suspect it's a combination of everything put together. But our playing and training methods came under intense spotlight. When you look at the numbers, they're frightening. A total combined 89 missed games from all the injuries we had. 62 due to injuries, 13 due to muscle fatigue, 13 due to traumas, 1 due to inflammation. The talk was that Orlani had given Pioli an ultimatum to remove his sports trainer and medical team. Pioli defended them and said openly in interviews, we need to understand what's causing the problem, without ever admitting that anyone was at fault. Strangely, after January, after being knocked out of these competitions, the injuries lightened up. But also the reporting of the injuries really did not come through. So I'm kind of half thinking whether it was done on purpose. That completes chapter 2. Next, we will have chapter 3, where I'll discuss some of the stuff that ownership did to us throughout the season, their messaging, but also where we go from here.